Ever stop to think about, I don't know, screw pumps?
Probably not the most exciting dinner table conversation.
Right, not exactly a headline grabber. But, and this is what's kind of crazy, they're huge GE in the global market.
Way bigger than most people would guess, yeah.
So we've been digging into this report, and honestly, the numbers are pretty mind-blowing.
When you say screw pumps, it doesn't exactly scream multi-billion-dollar industry,
Yeah.
but that's exactly what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's wild. This report predicts the global market's going to hit 300 and 680 million US dollars in 2025.
And it doesn't stop there.
Nope, keeps climbing. By 2033, they're estimating it'll balloon to, get this, 395.75 million. That's a CAGR, the compound annual growth rate, of 4.90% from 2025 to 2033.
That's serious growth.
Oh, and there's another estimate in the report that puts that CAGR even higher, at 5.40%.
So either way you look at it, it's significant, right?
Absolutely. But what's really interesting, beyond just these huge numbers, is understanding what's actually driving this growth.
Yeah, it's not just about selling more pumps. It's about what's changing out there.
Exactly. This report really helps us understand those deeper trends, and it's pretty fascinating. Where are these pumps being used? Why is the demand going up? We'll be looking at market size projections, growth rates, the whole shebang.
It's about connecting those dots.
So the report pinpoints a few key factors behind this growth. First up, you've got the whole push for modernization, especially in water and wastewater infrastructure.
Right, essential stuff. And globally, there's this huge drive to upgrade those systems, partly because of growing populations.
Yeah, and those environmental concerns, got to factor that in.
Absolutely. Then you've got the increasing use of screw pumps and hydraulic fracturing.
Which, for those who might not know, it's how they get oil and gas from shale rock. And apparently, screw pumps are pretty effective at handling all those fluids.
They are, very much so. And of course, you can't forget the chemical industry. It's constantly expanding. And they need efficient ways to move all those often, well, pretty harsh chemicals around.
So those are like the big three driving this whole thing.
Yeah, think about it. Modern water systems, you've got to move enormous amounts of water efficiently. Screw pumps are great for that.
Hydraulic fracturing, you're dealing with really abrasive fluids under tons of pressure. Certain screw pumps can handle that like a champ.
And then you've got chemicals, which can be super corrosive. You need a pumping technology that can stand up to that.
Makes sense. But of course, no market is perfect, right?
Right. The report does point out some potential challenges.
Yeah, like screw pumps, they fall under positive displacement pumps, and those can have kind of high maintenance costs.
That's true. That can be a factor for companies. And then there's the whole thing about keeping spare parts around, just in case. That adds to the cost, too.
So those are things to consider.
Definitely. But I'd imagine manufacturers are always working on ways to make their pumps even more durable, more reliable, and less expensive to maintain, right?
Oh, for sure. Got to stay competitive. But, okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the regional breakdown. This is where things get really interesting.
Oh yeah, the global picture is one thing, but when you zoom in on specific regions, the story gets a lot more nuanced.
So just to recap, globally, we're looking at a market of 300 and 680 million US dollars in 2025, jumping to 5,395.75 million by 2033. Those CAGRs we talked about,
Yeah.
all based on 2024 as the starting point and forecasting out to 2033.
That's almost a decade of projected growth, which helps us get a sense of the long-term trends.
Right, and when you break it down by region, you really see some distinct patterns.
Yeah, some real hotspots.
So first up, Asia Pacific, or APAC. This region is like the king right now, holding the biggest market share in 2025, around 37% of the global revenue.
That's massive.
It translates to a market size of 1,361.60 million US dollars in 2025 alone. But here's the kicker. APAC is also predicted to be the fastest growing region. Their CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is a whopping 6.4%.
So if you're like an investor or someone watching global industrial trends, APAC's got to be on your radar.
Big time. But of course, it's not like the whole region is growing at the same rate.
No, it's not a monolith. The report goes deeper, looks at individual countries.
Exactly. And there are some real power players within APAC. China, for example, is gigantic. Their market is projected to be 571.87 million US dollars in 2025.
And even with a huge market like that, their growth rate is still a healthy 5.9%.
Then you've got India, another major player. They're looking at 136.16 million US dollars in 2025. But their growth rate, it's even faster, 8.3%.
So those two together, China and India, they're really driving a big chunk of that APAC growth.
And it gets even more granular. Southeast Asia as a whole, they're at 89.87 million US dollars in 2025 with a CAGR of 7.2%.
Pretty impressive.
Then you've got individual markets like Singapore, 27.23 million, growing at 6.7%. Taiwan, 53.1 million, growing at 6.2%.
So even the smaller markets are seeing healthy growth.
Yep, and the rest of APAC, collectively, they're at 61.27 million, also growing at 6.2%. And then there are the more developed economies. Australia, for example, their market is 70.8 million, and they're still growing at 5.7%. South Korea, even bigger, 163.39 million, growing at 5.5%.
Solid numbers.
And even Japan, which is a pretty mature market, is still seeing positive growth, 4.9%, with a market of 187.9 million.
So what's the story behind all this growth in APAC?
Well, the report highlights a few key things. Rapid urbanization and industrialization, for starters. It's creating this huge demand for infrastructure, for factories, for everything. And screw pumps are a key part of that.
Makes sense. They need to be able to move things around.
Plus, there's a big demand for screw pumps in specific sectors like oil and gas, chemicals, and food and beverages, all industries that are booming in APAC.
So it's like this perfect storm of factors coming together.
And then you've got automation. More and more industries are automating their processes, and they need reliable, efficient pumps that can handle that.
And screw pumps fit the bill.
And last but not least, there's this growing emphasis on environmental regulations in the region.
Right. So companies are being pushed to adopt more eco-friendly technologies.
And in some cases, screw pumps are actually a cleaner, more efficient option compared to older technologies. So it's all these factors working together to drive that incredible growth in APAC.
Makes total sense. So moving on, let's look at North America.
Now, while APAC might be the growth leader, North America is still a major market. They're holding over 29% of the global revenue in 2025.
Yeah, that's a market size of 167.20 million US dollars. Not too shabby.
Not at all. But their growth rate is a bit more modest, projected at 4.0% CAGR from 2025 to 2033.
Still decent growth, though.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just not as explosive as APAC. And when we look closer at North America, the US obviously is the big dog.
Unsurprisingly.
They're projected to have a market size of 842.02 million US dollars in 2025, growing at 3.8%. Then there's Canada with a market of 128.06 million, growing slightly faster at 4.8%.
And Mexico.
Mexico's at 97.12 million with a CAGR of 4.5%. So why the more steady growth in North America compared to the APAC boom?
Well, the report points to a few things. The U.S., for example, has a pretty established oil and gas industry, and that continues to be a big driver for screw pump demand.
Right. And the chemical processing industry and water treatment, those are major sectors in North America, too, and they all need reliable pumps.
Right. It's about meeting the ongoing needs of these well-established industries.
But there's also a focus on technology. The report mentions that advancements in screw pump design and materials are playing a role.
Oh, definitely. And there's this big push for automation and energy efficiency in North America. So companies are looking for ways to optimize their existing systems, make them run better, use less energy.
Exactly. So it's less about building brand new infrastructure and more about refining and upgrading what they already have.
It's a different kind of growth story.
For sure. Okay, so next up, Europe. They're holding over 24% of the global revenue in 2025, with a market size of 883.2 zillion US dollars.
Another big chunk of the market.
But their growth rate is projected to be the slowest of the major regions, at 3.2% CAGR from 2025 to 2033.
So why the slower growth in Europe?
Well, the report doesn't really dive deep into that, but we can speculate a little.
Sure, maybe it's because a lot of European countries already have pretty modern infrastructure.
That could be part of it. And maybe there's less emphasis on rapid expansion and more on maintaining and optimizing what they already have.
It's like what we were saying about North America.
Exactly. But like all these regions, Europe is diverse. You've got Germany, which is the biggest market in Europe, with a projected size of 174.87 million US dollars in 2025.
And they're growing at 3.4%. Then there's the UK with a market of 148.38 million.
And they're actually growing a little faster at 4.0%.
So some variation within the region for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then there's Russia.
A big market.
Yeah.
But facing some, well, unique challenges right now.
Right. But they still represent a market of 136 $8.90 million US dollars, though their growth rate is projected to be pretty low, just 2.2%.
Understandable.
And then you've got the rest of Europe collectively at 123.65 million, with the slowest growth rate in the region, only 1.9%.
So clearly, some countries are doing better than others.
Yep. And then you've got France at 81.25 million, growing at 2.4%. Italy, 75.96 million, growing at 2.6%. Spain, 72.42 million, growing at 2.3%.
So pretty consistent, but not super fast growth rate across those countries.
Yeah, kind of a theme in Europe. And then there are some smaller markets like Sweden, 27.38 million, growing at 3.3%. Denmark, 18.55 million, growing at 3.0%. Switzerland, 13.25 million, growing at 2.8%.
And even Luxembourg, right?
Yep, Luxembourg is tiny, but they're actually projected to grow pretty fast, 3.5% CAGR, starting from a base of 10.60 million US dollars.
It makes you wonder what's driving that.
Right. What's going on in Luxembourg that's fueling that growth? But broadly, across Europe, the report says that investments in industrial and infrastructure development are key drivers.
Makes sense. Got to keep things moving, literally.
And there's ongoing demand from the oil and gas sector, the water and wastewater treatment industry, and a big food and beverage industry in Europe, too.
Oh, right. Europe is a big food producer.
Plus, Europe has a strong emphasis on environmental sustainability and some pretty strict regulations.
So companies are looking for ways to be more efficient, more eco-friendly, and often that means investing in newer technologies, like screw pumps.
Exactly. So it's this mix of factors driving the European market, even though their growth rate is a bit slower than other regions. Now, let's head south to South
A
America.
whole different ballgame.
They account for just over 4% of the global revenue in 2025, with a market size of 139.64 million US dollars.
Not as big as the other regions we've talked about.
But their growth rate is pretty impressive, 5.6% CAGR from 2025 to 2033, so they're definitely on the rise.
This sounds like a region to watch.
Oh, yeah. And within South America, Brazil is the dominant market, projected to reach 59.85 million US dollars in 2025. They're growing at a solid 6.2%.
Brazil's a big economy, so that makes sense.
Then you've got Argentina with a market of 23.49 million, and they're actually the fastest growing in the region at 6.5%.
Wow, even faster than Brazil.
The rest of South America combined is at 22.51 million, growing at 4.7%. And then there are countries like Colombia, Peru, and Chile.
What are their numbers looking like?
Colombia is at 12.45 million, growing at 5.4%. Peru, 11.47 million, growing at 5.8%. And Chile, 10.07 million, growing at 5.9%. So they're all seeing pretty healthy growth, even though they're starting from a smaller base.
So what's driving all this growth in South America?
Well, according to the report, one big factor is increased spending on industrial and infrastructure development. Lots of new projects popping up, which means lots of new pumps needed.
It's like a construction boom.
Kinda, yeah.
Right.
And then there's the demand from, you guessed it, the oil and gas industry and the water and wastewater treatment sector. Those are always big users of screw pumps.
Makes sense. Those industries are pretty universal.
Right. And on top of that, South America is really focusing on cost and energy savings. So companies are looking for technologies that can help them do more with less.
And screw pumps are often more efficient than older types of pumps.
So they're a good fit for that trend. Okay. So next up is the Middle East. They're holding about 4% of the global revenue in 2025, with a market size of 147.2 million US dollars.
Another region with a lot of potential.
Yep, and their projected growth rate is strong, 6.2% CAGR from 2025 to 2033.
So on par with APAC's overall growth.
Exactly. And given that the Middle East is, well, kind of the oil and gas capital of the world, it's not surprising that that industry is a major driver for screw pump demand.
I was going to say, they must use a lot of pumps.
Oh, yeah, tons. Saudi Arabia is the biggest market in the region, with a projected size of 51.81 million US dollars in 2025, growing at 6.5%.
And the UAE.
UAE is at 30.32 million, with a growth rate of 6.7%. The rest of the Middle East collectively is at 32.68 million, growing at 5.4%.
So it's not just about oil and gas, though.
Nope. The report also highlights a couple of other trends.
What are those?
Well, there's a growing trend towards automation in the Middle East, just like we saw in APAC and North America. And that's pushing demand for more sophisticated pumps that can integrate with automated systems.
Right. Got to stay up to date.
Plus, there's an increasing emphasis on environmental regulations in the region.
So, again, companies are looking for ways to be more efficient and reduce their environmental impact.
Which in some cases means turning to screw pumps. They're not always the greenest option, but they can be better than some older technologies.
Interesting. So it's this mix of traditional energy needs and a push for modernization that's driving the Middle East market.
Exactly. And last but not least, we have Africa. They're holding around 2.2% of the global revenue in 2025, with a market size of 80.96 million US dollars.
A smaller market, but still significant.
Oh, yeah, and they're projected to grow at a solid 4.3% CAGR from 2025 to 2033.
Steady progress.
South Africa is currently the biggest market for screw pumps in Africa, at 28.50 million US dollars in 2025, growing at 5.2%. Nigeria is smaller, at 6.48 million, growing at 4.5%.
And the rest of the continent.
The rest of Africa combined is at 45.99 million, growing at 3.5%.
So what's the story there?
Well, the report points to a few things. Rapid industrialization and urbanization across Africa are big drivers.
Right, they're building a lot of new stuff.
Exactly. And then there's the need for basic infrastructure, things like water and wastewater treatment plants and new factories. All of that requires pumps.
Makes sense.
And then, like many other regions, Africa has a growing food and beverage industry, which is another big user of screw pumps.
Right. Got to keep people fed.
Plus, there's a growing awareness of environmental sustainability in Africa, so that's also playing a role in technology choices.
So it's a mix of development needs and a desire for more sustainable solutions.
Exactly. All right, so we've covered the regional breakdown. Now let's dive into the different components of the screw pumps market. The report looks at two main categories: on-premise and cloud-based solutions.
Interesting. So like traditional systems versus more modern connected systems.
Exactly. And the report says that on-premise solutions are still dominant right now. They hold the largest share of the market.
Why is that?
Well, it's partly because of the industries that use screw pumps the most: chemicals, wastewater treatment, and oil and gas.
Right. Those are pretty traditional industries.
They are. And for them, reliability, control, and customization are super important. So having the pumps physically located on site, that gives them more direct control, makes it easier to do maintenance, and they can tailor those systems to their exact needs.
It's about having that hands-on approach.
Yeah. But on the flip side, cloud-based solutions are identified as the fastest growing segment. So there's definitely a shift happening.
So what's driving that?
Well, it's the whole digital transformation thing, Industry 4.0, more automation, more data exchange, more connected systems.
Right. Everything's going digital these days.
And that's opening up a ton of new possibilities for screw pumps. Things like predictive maintenance, where you can use data to predict problems before they happen. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then there's remote monitoring and control, so you don't have to be physically present to manage the pumps.
Makes things a lot more efficient.
Exactly. And then there's the data analysis side of things. With cloud-connected pumps, you can collect tons of data about how they're performing and use that to optimize their efficiency.
So you're not just guessing anymore. You have real insights.
Right. And all of that plays into the sustainability trend.
Makes sense.
Because by using data to make pumps run more efficiently, you can reduce energy consumption and waste.
So cloud-based solutions are kind of win-win.
They definitely seem to have a lot of advantages. So while those traditional on-premise systems are still the workhorses of the industry, the future is looking pretty connected and data-driven.
Exciting times. So the report also looks at screw pump applications.
It does. It breaks it down by where these pumps are actually being used.
Interesting.
And the biggest application segment, at least right now, is the commercial sector.
So like office buildings, hotels, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Screw pumps are used for all sorts of things in those environments, mainly plumbing, HVAC systems, basically anything that involves moving fluids around.
Right. You need pumps for that.
And screw pumps are good at handling different types of fluids, so they're pretty versatile. Plus, the commercial sector is always looking for ways to save money and energy.
And screw pumps can help with that?
Yep. So it's a good fit.
What about residential applications?
That's actually the fastest growing segment.
Really? That's surprising.
It is, kind of. But it makes sense when you think about it. More and more people are interested in energy-efficient homes, sustainable living, all of that.
Right. It's a big trend.
And modern homes often have more complex heating and plumbing systems that need reliable pumps.
So screw pumps are finding their way into our homes.
They are. And the whole smart home thing is probably going to accelerate that trend even more.
Interesting. So commercial is big now, but residential is the one to watch.
Definitely. Now, the report also looks at who's actually buying these pumps, the end users.
Makes sense. Got to know your customer.
And the biggest end user segment right now is property managers and agents.
That makes sense. They manage all kinds of properties.
Right. They handle commercial buildings, industrial sites, residential properties, and screw pumps are essential for all of them. Plumbing, wastewater management, HVAC systems, they need them to keep everything running smoothly.
So they're constantly buying pumps.
Pretty much. But the fastest growing end user segment is actually corporate occupiers.
So companies that use screw pumps in their own facilities.
Exactly. And as companies expand and upgrade their operations, they're investing more and more in screw pumps.
Why is that?
Well, a few reasons. One is sustainability. Companies are under pressure to be more environmentally friendly, and screw pumps can help with that. They can be more energy efficient than older types of pumps.
Right, less waste.
Yep. And then there's efficiency. Screw pumps can handle a lot of different materials, and they're generally pretty reliable, so they can help companies optimize their processes and save money in the long run.
It's a smart investment.
It is. So property managers are the big buyers right now, but corporations are catching up quickly.
Interesting shift. So what about the competitive landscape? Who's making all these pumps?
Well, the report says it's a pretty competitive market. There are a lot of players, both big and small.
Makes sense. It's a growing market, so everyone wants a piece of the pie.
Right. And to succeed, you need to offer a wide range of pump types, have a good distribution network, and constantly innovate.
It's got to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. The report mentions a few of the key companies in the market. Alpha Label AB, Circor International Inc., Desmi AS, Dover Corporation.
Those are some big names.
Yeah, they're major players in the industrial equipment space. And the list goes on. Eric Netsch, GmbH & Co., Holding KG, Flowserve Corporation, FL Smith & Co. AS, Netzi SCH, ITT Inc., Iwaki Co., Ltd.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I know, right? And then there's Nimal, KRL GmbH, Retopumps Limited, Orlicon, SPX, Flow Inc.
So a real mix of global giants and more specialized companies.
Yep. And the report highlights a couple of recent developments. For example, Nemo built a new facility focused on the biomass sector back in March 2022.
Biomass, that's interesting.
It is. It shows how screw pump technology is finding its way into new and growing industries. Biomass is becoming more and more important as a sustainable energy source, so there's a growing demand for equipment that can process it efficiently.
Makes sense. Screw pumps are pretty versatile, so it makes sense that they'd be used in a variety of industries.
Exactly. And then there's Orlicon Barmag. They developed a new type of screw pump specifically designed for handling shear-sensitive materials.
What does that mean?
Basically, it means materials that are easily damaged by friction or pressure, things like certain polymers, adhesives, or food products.
Oh, I see. So a more delicate touch is needed.
Exactly. And this new pump from Orlicon Barmag is designed to move those materials gently without damaging them.
That's pretty cool. So it's a constant process of innovation and adaptation.
Yep. So to wrap it all up, this deep dive into the screw pumps market has revealed a surprisingly dynamic and growing industry.
Yeah, I had no idea it was so big.
Me neither. And with the need for better infrastructure, the push for sustainability, and the constant innovation in pump technology, it seems like this growth is only going to continue.
Absolutely. And it just shows how seemingly niche industrial components can actually play a huge role in shaping the global economy.
Totally. One of the things that really stood out to me was the projected growth in residential applications.
Yeah, that was surprising.
It means that this technology, which we usually associate with heavy industry, is becoming more and more relevant in our everyday lives.
It's kind of like how we don't think about all the complex systems that make our smartphones work.
Right, it's all happening behind the scenes. So I guess the takeaway here is that there's a whole world of industrial innovation happening that we don't even realize.
And it's fascinating to think about what other seemingly niche technologies might be experiencing this kind of explosive growth driven by these global trends.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the world is a lot more interconnected than we sometimes realize.
Absolutely. And if you found this discussion about screw pumps interesting, I think you might really enjoy looking into the advancements in materials science. There's a whole other area that's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible,
Yeah.
and it's having a huge impact on the efficiency and durability of pumps and all sorts of other technologies.
Definitely worth checking out.
For sure. It's mind-blowing stuff.